This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Be warned. This is a trick question.
Hello, this is Wretched Radio. A question: do you have reason to despair? Please note, as the professional announcer warned you, this is a trick question. For the Christian, the correct answer would be no. I have no reason to despair. And yet, we do. Don't we? Because there's all kinds of things swirling around in our noodles that can cause us to have some angst. And yet, when our brains are in alignment with God's thinking, we really have no reason to despair. Not a valid reason. Not buying it? Let's move into the realm of finances for a moment. Question.
Please note, this too is a trick question.
Do you have reason to fear making a payment on your credit card? And the answer to that question, of course, depends on how much money you've got in the bank. If you're loaded, you've got funds that can easily cover whatever your credit card expenses are. It doesn't bother you at all, does it? Now, if you don't have resources to pay your debt, then you start to get a little nail-bitey. That's right, nail-bitey. That's the correct use of the word nail-biting. You will respond to whatever your situation is, depending on what you believe your resources are. And that is why, if you are a Christian and you understand what you have, who is on your side, or to use the vernacular of the whippersnappers, who's got your back, you really don't have a reason to despair. If you've got $1 million in the bank and your credit card debt is $42, you're not worried about it. You're just going to deal with it and move on. There's nothing to be afraid of. Similarly, when you know that God is for you and when you know who this God is, there is really no valid reason to despair. Perhaps you're thinking, but I've got big issues. And I'm sure you do in an earthly sense, but you've got bigger resources. If you will, you've got a bigger bank account. You have got a bigger well to tap into than whatever your issue is. When you remember correct theology, and that is what we are going to endeavor to demonstrate, how theology can help you to not despair when you think about what God has already said to you rightly. Why would we do such a thing?
One of the more troubling observations I've noticed of late is the following. There seems to be an increased prevalence of despair among God's people.
And that ought not to be. God does not want you despairing. God wants you to have joy. God wants you to have emotions that are not whiplashed constantly by whatever the events are that are swirling around you. He wants us thinking rightly, with the result being joy. The voice that you just heard, and it's a really cool voice, if you don't mind me saying so, Dr. Stephen Ewell. Jimmy,
yep.
Where is that man from? Because that accent, I can't quite get a handle on it.
Well, I'm not real sure.
All righty then. That would explain everything.
I think
he's a mystery man.
Well, I think he's from a combination of different places, and I can't nail down the origin.
If I recall, he's got some Canadian in there.
Yeah.
To boot. Dr. Stephen Ewell, speaking at the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors Conference, speaking on the issue of hope. This, by the way, is a lecture that is included in Drive-By Biblical Counseling 3, our brand new resource, and it is hot off of the presses, available at wretched.org, dealing specifically with the theme of that particular conference, which was suicide, despair, anxiety, depression, and underneath that umbrella would be issues like cutting, self-harm, bullying, eating disorders, all issues that people deal with and wrestle with that have a biblical solution. So if you've been feeling some despair, let's let Dr. Stephen, I've got a better voice than you, Ewell, help us to apply the Bible to the issue of despair by understanding, first of all, what it is.
Despair. It clouds vision. It impairs function. It manifests itself in apathy, anxiety, insomnia, hypersomnia, irritability, emotional instability, cognitive impairment, and even in some cases, although it pains us to acknowledge it, self-harm and suicide.
That is what despair will do for you. And all too often these days, our first response tends to be our medicine cabinet, isn't it? As soon as you feel an ache or a pain, where do you go? Honey, where's the ibuprofen? Or do I need Tylenol? Which is it? Just get, where are they now? And maybe you've even got a drawer set aside for those things in your bathroom. It's the medicine drawer. Used to have medicine chests a long time ago, but apparently we've decided those aren't worth keeping. So now we've got drawers filled with drugs, and they are a blessing oftentimes, and yet so often for our spiritual maladies, our first stop tends to be that same medicine cabinet, and that ought not to be.
There are multiple ingredients to this dilemma known as despair. But when it is all said and done, whatever else might be going on, whatever else might be transpiring, we are, in the final analysis, dealing with a spiritual crisis. A spiritual crisis. And my friend, I submit to you, this is my thesis going forward, that a spiritual crisis requires a spiritual remedy.
There is great news if that is true. The Bible has the remedy because the Bible deals with spiritual issues. If we immediately, when we are despairing, please note just the prerequisite nota bene requiring medication. Can there ever be an appropriate use of psychotropics or medication regarding some issues? Yes, but that's not the realm that we're dealing in. Those tend to be the exception, not the rule. Nevertheless, it's worth stating they do have a place. What we're talking about here is the rather common malady of just being in a bit of a snit about our circumstances or about what the future holds, because we don't believe that there is hope. That is a spiritual issue. And a remedy that will help you immediately is recognizing that this is not something that is biological that we're discussing in this conversation. It's something spiritual. Now the Bible just gets locked in, loaded, and ready to help you. And we must start then by understanding what hope is. If you're despairing, it is because you are without hope. This is not going to get better. That's what despair is. This is just, I'm undone. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Question, what is hope? Consider the semantic range of that word, how often we use it. I hope that the turkey sandwiches that Mrs. Friel made are going to somehow disappear in the fridge, and I'll get to go to Zaxby's today instead. I'm hoping for that. I'm hoping that the weather's really going to be nice this week so that we can go for lots of walks outside, but I don't know. I'm hoping. I'm crossing my fingers, but I don't know. That is not biblical hope.
Hope is the life-changing certainty that someday we will have all that God has promised. Again, the only remedy for an utter loss of hope is to abound in hope the life-changing, life-transforming, life-altering, right here, right now, certainty that someday we will have all that God has promised.
That is different than hoping for a good weather forecast. Crossing my fingers. Hope we get to tee off this week. That's not Christian hope. Christian hope is a certainty. It's not a longing, what if, I hope that. No, it is a this is my hope. I am going to be with God. Things are going to be better, not just temporarily, but forever. That is a certainty. That is a promise. That is our hope, and it is a wildly different definition than the world's. And if you are struggling with despair, let us begin by recognizing it's a spiritual malady, and there's a spiritual cure. Hope. We will unpack that next on Wretched Radio.
Hey,
Todd.
sweetie.
Take her around the block a few times?
Who's a good girl? You're not, because nobody does good. No, not one. Romans 5 says we're born in sin and iniquity, and our hearts are deceitful and wicked. You know that if you'd use the law, which brings about the knowledge of sin.